Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Happy New Year. I thought it would be fun to end the year by reviewing and dissecting one of the most, I don't even have words to describe this movie. It created a whole new, I don't even know, like I know how this movie made me feel, but I don't have the words to describe it. So the movie that we are discussing is RRR, Rise, Roar, Revolt. And it's hard to know the exact moment when this movie had me, but it was very early on. And you kind of forget that it's subtitled, right? I think if a story is very well told, it doesn't really matter which language it's being told in. And normally I'm not gonna say I don't like, but action sequences can be a bit tedious sometimes in general, because a lot of the action that we see, like there's very few movies where the action really got me. And in this movie, the action sequences were fantastic and they were very entertaining because you didn't really know what was gonna happen next. Like they were choreographed in such a way where you were just like anticipating them and you didn't want them to be over. And I think, and that's a very difficult thing to do. Briefly, the movie follows a tribal guardian assigned to rescue a kidnapped girl from colonial monsters, only to befriend an Indian soldier working on the other side. This story is very, very, very loosely based on two Indian revolutionaries who fought against the British. And of course, there's no actual record of them having met or being friends in any way. Like it just takes kind of inspiration from these two historical figures. So in an interview, S.S. Rajamouli explains that the film is a work of historical fiction. The characters, of course, are real, but the events are not. However, considering the near century that India was under colonial rule, it's hard to even begin to fathom the atrocities that occurred during this time. On the flip side, not every British person was bad, right? So the film is shot originally in Telugu, which is a different language than the language that you'll see on Netflix. And in an interview, he mentions that there was a British officer that actually collected this language and put it in a dictionary. And because of his efforts, the language was saved. And, this is something that he felt, was a massive contribution to his community. And so there are, some of the characters that he portrays on screen, like there were good British people. Does the exception make the rule? I'll let you guys decide on that. Again, there are many, many, many different atrocities. So whatever, you see on screen, just imagine the reality of it. And I liked how the movie put these characters in extremes, right? Like you have colonial monsters, essentially, people that were terrible. And then you have real allyship, right? He shows characters that are very unproblematic. And the point being, I think, there was never a time period in which whipping people or abusing people was appropriate. It's not like the time period made it any different. Like there were people who knew better and tried to do better, but sadly, a lot of them didn't. And I like the confidence in which this film was told, right? Like there's no gray area, right? Either your intentions were good or they weren't. And that's just that on that. What was most impressive was how he was able to balance the emotion with the action sequences. So again, for the action to be believable, the story has to resonate. And in an interview, he explains that emotion doesn't have a culture, right? If a story is good, it's good. And the movie is set during one of the most difficult times in Indian history. And we're introduced to two characters fighting against colonial rule, but they're doing it in very different ways. And by bringing them together, you create an even more emotional attachment to the story. And the more invested we become in the story, the more believable the action sequences become, right? Because, historically speaking and generally speaking, people are capable of doing extraordinary things if their backs are against the wall. And so having these two characters in a time where if there was ever your back against the wall, this is it, right? So suddenly their ability to do these extraordinary things is sort of aided by the time period in which the movie is set. And so the film, in terms of pushing creative boundaries, it is able to do that, and it does that very successfully. An important point to note is that the movie is streaming on Netflix, but it's dubbed in Hindu. And so the original language has been dubbed in several different languages at this point. And in an interview, he said that the process is quite complicated. So if you notice, like, the way it's dubbed, it's almost natural. Like, you don't really notice it unless you're paying close attention to it. And that's because to keep the integrity of the film. So if you're watching it, if you can watch it in the original language, you should. I don't have access to it. I watched it on Netflix and it was dubbed. But from my understanding, it wouldn't really make much of a difference. Like, the story or the messaging still is conveyed regardless. In terms of Bollywood, so I don't know much about Bollywood. Like most people, I think there's an assumption that every movie that comes out of India is a Bollywood movie, but that's actually not the case. So India has many states. Each of these states have their own languages, and slowly they're all having their own film industries. So this filmmaker is from, his community is the Telugu film industry. So this is a separate industry to Bollywood, right? So Bollywood, this is the Hindi film industry, and it's the most popular, and most of the movies that have crossed over are from Bollywood. But now it seems that a lot of states, especially I guess southern states in India, are having their own kind of renaissance when it comes to filmmaking and, you know, breaking in to the industry. And it doesn't seem like this is a trend. So for this movie to break over as, you know, not a Bollywood film is quite impressive, actually. So that's something to note. Personally, like, I envy anybody who watched this in theaters, and it would be really fun, like, if you could go around the world and see how different people were watching this movie. Like in India, for example, I read that they were dancing and clapping, and this is quite normal, I guess, in cinemas there, whereas American audiences would just clap, or, you know, just seeing the reactions to these like massive scenes would have been really entertaining. And the director, you know, he makes it very clear. So before going into this movie is made for entertainment purposes. It's not like, yes, there are messages you could read into it. There are different things you could read into it, but actually that wasn't the purpose. And his thing is, making a film for entertainment is an incredibly difficult task. It does take a lot of talent to create a 3-hour movie that does not feel like a 3-hour movie. Like, that's a phenomenal feat to have accomplished. You know, nowadays with inflation and the world is burning down, people are paying their hard-earned money. Like, you really have to think about what you're watching, especially if you're paying for it, before you go in. And so his hope is that he was able to create a movie that people were able to escape into and then go back to their daily lives. And I think he did that magnificently. Like, it is just amazing. And I think a lot of bad movies are excused nowadays because they have messaging, right? And so this movie, you get the sense that he doesn't really care what anybody thinks. And so you will either love this film, or if you're pretentious and annoying, I don't see how you cannot be entertained by this movie. And for people who say it's, you know, it's just entertainment, when is the last time you watched something that was purely entertaining and fun? And so for me, to be honest, like, next to maybe Top Gun Maverick, like, I can't even think of a movie I've watched that I was like, that was so fun. Okay, so I'm gonna break my video down according to the two main characters. And this movie has a lot of symbolism and Indian folklore and history weaved into the plot. And so again, it kind of takes these two real life characters and it enhances them through mythology. Now, what these mythologies are, I don't know. And it doesn't really affect your understanding of the film. You know, the film flows just the same anyways. And one of the things the filmmaker does is by pitting fire and water, right? Making one character fire and the other character water. And the idea being that, like, you know, against one another, they'll destroy each other. But if they're together, they're unstoppable, right? And kind of having that imagery when it comes to two friends, you know, individually they're amazing, but together they're unstoppable is really fantastic. Okay, so the drama begins when this evil colonizer decides to purchase a small child, Malli, and keep her enslaved, ironically, for entertainment purposes. this sets off a chain reaction, which would bring together two of like my favorite characters that I've seen in a very long time. Like, just thinking about this movie makes me really happy. Starting off with Raju, he is what I would consider the Indian Terminator. And we are first introduced to him trying to detain his fellow man, and watching the determination in which he tried to enslave his fellow man was really something. And it was just breathtaking to watch, right? You have this man that, you know, I've never been so attracted and so repulsed by a character at the same time. He just had colonialism pulsing through his veins. And personally, I went into this movie, like, I just let it take me along. So the whole time I'm thinking, like, what a waste. Like, I remember watching that scene and I'm thinking, this makes absolutely no sense, until you figure out where this will is coming from. Raju is really interesting because in terms of like the colonial mentality, he's everything, he's picture perfect, right? You have a man in terms of how he dresses, how he speaks, how he presents himself. He's perfect, right? You have a wolf in wolf's clothing, and the British don't really think anything of it because at the end of the day, they don't see their subjects as people. They see them as dogs, right? So a well-trained dog is still a dog. And the idea that their sort of subjects have the willpower or the intelligence to rally against them, or, you know, they would ever have that in them, is just not something that occurs to them, right? Raju is an interesting character because he's at a crossroads, right? He doesn't get promoted, and I appreciated how the film doesn't give you any outs, because I thought after he didn't get promoted, maybe Raju would get frustrated and he would see the light. Instead, he goes harder. So the kidnapping, again, it triggers this whole set of events. And so it really be your own people that snitch you out. And so word gets round that somebody is coming to collect this child and that they should be very afraid. No one knows who this mystery vigilante is, what he looks like, you know, where he's coming from, but the colonialists want his head. So as a reward, they tell everyone, listen, if you're able to catch this vigilante, if you catch him alive, you'll be promoted. And if you catch him dead, we'll give you some money. And of course, Raju just jumps at the opportunity and he can't wait, right? He says, okay, challenge accepted. And this is it. And he goes undercover. And I really appreciated the fact that Raju's character, like, even undercover, he's not really that believable. Again, like, they don't really compromise the character in any way. Like, his clothes are the same, his language, the man is a walking red flag. Early on, he's almost able to figure it out, which again speaks to his talent. He's really, really dangerous. The first time Bheem and Raju meet, it's phenomenal, right? It's like nothing is coincidental. Nothing that's meant to be will ever pass you. And the movie doesn't really waste a second, right? So individually, they're not able to save this child, but together, they're able to do the impossible. And shooting this scene, this bridge scene, I read was like a logistical nightmare. Obviously, no government was going to give them a permit to blow up an empty bridge. So they had to combine VFX with like miniatures to try and choreograph the scene. And then the actors had to make it believable. So that scene, along with many, was crazy difficult to shoot. And, you know, the first time they meet, it's almost love at first sight, right? There's a synchronicity. There's just this feeling like I've known this person my whole life. And wondering why Raju was unable to figure it out. But I think he was so blinded by love that he just kind of excused a lot of things, because Bheem at face value, I mean, it doesn't really make any sense, right? And so they go through this whole honeymoon phase. And again, the confidence in which this film is told, like, I really appreciated this bromance. And I was reading, like, in an interview, again, the director says, I can't really care what people think, right? So these are best friends. You know, nowadays you have to think about everything, right? Every touch, every caress. And, you know, not every gesture has to mean something, right? These are best friends. And whatever they need to do to convey that emotion to the audience is conveyed, right? Whether it be piggybacking, like, a lot of their actions don't make any sense, but the feeling is felt. right? Like when you first meet somebody that you really love in terms of friendship, that honeymoon phase is amazing because you want to do everything together. And so that whole scene, I was just smiling ear to ear because I'm like, I felt it. Even though I was like, I've never done that before, I wanted to do that for someone before. So they have absolutely nothing in common, but at the same time, they have everything in common. So turning now to Bheem. Bheem is a wolf in sheep's clothing, and what keeps him in check is this larger goal. So he's been kind of tasked with this mission to save Malli. It's not his sister, but it feels like his sister, right? Like he's the person in the community that's in charge of like protecting the community. And so it's his responsibility to bring this little girl back. And so he needs to do that as quietly as possible without kind of causing repercussions. And I think the longer he spends time with Raju, the more confidence he gets, right? He starts to become very angry, very frustrated, and it's getting harder and harder to hide his frustration. And he also gets more confident, right? The Bheem we meet at the beginning of the film to the Bheem we meet at the end are two different things, right? And again, it's the more time these two friends spend together, they kind of rub off on each other, and they kind of make each other's weaknesses their strengths. And so I think one of the scenes that showed that really well, among many, by the way, like you could dissect so much about this movie, but I'm just going to dissect the moments that brought me the most joy. So this film has an interesting way of, I guess, towing the line between cheap thrills. You know, he knows how to trigger an audience and then get us invested right away. So if you remember this party scene, right, you have a bunch of racists there. Raju is there, but he's an officer. And then you have poor Bheem who doesn't speak any English, and you're triggered, right? Like it's triggering watching these white guys bully this poor Indian guy. And then it just turns into this like spectacular dance-off. And I was reading that the actors spent 12 hours a day for 15 days, like rehearsing the scene. And the choreographer apparently worked for almost 2 months and, you know, came up with hundreds of variations for steps before they could even, you know, shoot anything. And it's incredibly difficult to get them to synchronize because although they're smiling, they're in a lot of pain, right? Because each actor has their own style, and then they have to like synchronize the dance like at the same time. And it's very entertaining because, you know, at one point I think Raju's character says, "Is this too spicy for you?" And I think this movie is going to be way too spicy for some audiences. Right, it's too hot to handle. Like this scene for me, I was like, y'all, I'm sweating. Like this is so fine, right? This is entertainment at its finest. And so the dancers and everybody, like to try and synchronize that was like another logistical nightmare. So Bheem's biggest advantage, like this scene was really sweet because Raju essentially gives up the dance battle for his friend. And again, watching them smile, but knowing how much pain they're in, was really sweet. So Bheem is getting closer and closer to his goal. And the thing about Bheem is, again, there's such a contrast between the two. And the biggest contrast is that he doesn't speak any English, which I think is Bheem's biggest advantage. Because there are so many times where he was saying stuff like, he was saying stuff like, "Oh, can I come over to your house?" or something. And this Jenny, like shout out to Jenny, she was a real ally. But she didn't really know what the man was saying, right? So that clearly benefited him in many, many ways because otherwise it was just creepy and uncomfortable. And so when Bheem finally sees his, you know, this young girl that he's been tasked, like his sister, I'll call Malli his sister because he feels like, you know, that's his sister because, you know, he comes from a small community, they're all family. And so he's angry. Right? He's angry because he can't take her back and he doesn't know what to do about it. And he's sick and tired of waiting. And I wonder how much of his sort of decision to attack the enemy directly was inspired by his time with, right? So this scene was very confident, and this is not Bheem's method, right? Like he's got lions, tigers, and bears, and he's coming at them directly. And the pacing of this film is phenomenal because like the twist doesn't come in the way that you think it's going to come, because Raju, again, he's very frustrating because you're hoping as an audience, you know that he has to change his opinion, because the film spends so much time building this friendship that you're like, how can he possibly turn on his friend? But he does. And there were times in the movie where they're giving us flashbacks of Raju, and I thought, damn, like, did he shoot his father as well? Like, does this man have no limits? You know, like, he was really limitless. And so the craziest sort of synchronicity here is when, you know, Raju is getting very close to figuring out who Bheem is, but he's poisoned by a snake. And Bheem saves him. And this scene of Bheem sitting there, you know, thankful that his friend is alive, and Raju's raggedy behind still trying to arrest him. Like, that part really tripped me up. Like, I don't know if anybody else was watching that. Like, are you really trying to arrest him right now? And you're dying? Like, where is this willpower coming from? Where is this monstrosity coming from? So this tiger scene was the most difficult scene that it was in the film to shoot. So the director said this scene was the worst scene he's ever shot. So it took more than 40 nights, because this scene is shot at night with almost 2,000 extras. So this scene, again, the way it was able to balance like action with, I guess, some realism, because I mean, these are wild animals. And so once they're unleashed, after that initial release, like, you kind of see moments where Bheem is even scared of the animals, because there's no way to control the animals, right? And I appreciated how they showed that in these scenes, because once the animals are unleashed, they're unleashed. They're not going to listen to Bheem or nobody, right? Like, they don't really care. So just that confidence plate was really funny. And so this is it, right? Like, I thought this was the moment where Raju was going to help his friend Bheem take Malli, and they were going to ride off into the sunset together. But it doesn't happen. He doesn't give us that twist right there, right? And the whole time Raju is fighting his friend, he can't even look at him. And we can't even look at him as an audience. They're like, excuse me, sir? Like, are you really still trying to capture this man? Like, so he arrests his friend. And the twist comes at a perfect time, because when you find out Raju's motivations, you know, our emotional investment in both characters suddenly increase, because Raju's trauma is far more than, you know, whatever Bheem is going through, because Raju lost his mother, he lost his father, and he promised his community that he would arm everybody in India with a gun, right? So this idea that Indians aren't even worth the bullet from the barrel. You know, what better revenge but arming everybody and, you know, giving them back their bullets in the most violent way possible, right? So the idea that, again, they're not even worth the bullet it would take to kill them. So Raju has this image of his family dying, and so he can't really sacrifice that for his friend Bheem. And this turning point, Bheem's song, was so sad. And I read that, you know, the actor was saying this was like his favorite scene in the movie, because there was a few things that he had to balance. So first, you know, when you think about Bheem's character, he's from a small village, right? He's the protector of their village. And so for him, in the village or in the forest, like, he is king, right? He's unstoppable. He's a monster, he's a beast. But when you take him to the material world, he's totally powerless. And on top of that, he was betrayed by his best friend. So his innocence kind of got him in this situation. And so he's angry, he's tired, he's being flogged to death. And at the same time, he still has this willpower not to kneel, right? He's like, whatever happens, I'm not going to kneel in front of these people. And so he's able to maintain that strength and that innocence and not let fear corrupt it. And then everybody in the community is able to watch that. And watching Raju like whip his friend and cry, like, you feel bad for both characters, because you understand what's at stake. And again, the circumstances in which this film takes place, you really are between a rock and a hard place, right? So his inability to kneel, and then not only that, but trigger everybody, kind of showed Raju like, damn, like, maybe there's other ways to do this. You know, maybe like I got this all wrong. You know, maybe we gotta tackle this from different sides. Towards the end of the movie, like, I'm really impressed that it didn't fall apart, because ultimately this movie is about friendship. Now, the implications of that are shown to us, but it never really loses sight. So you take this parallel rescue. So as soon as Raju kind of sees the light and saves his friend, he's not really motivated by anything besides saving his friend. And same thing with Bheem, right? Like, he just wants to go and save his friend, right? The colonizer is secondary. He's just like, listen, I need to save this man. He is my, I know it's not supposed to be a romance, but it plays like a romance. And you're just like, go get your friend, you know, like, get out of here, you know, go get your best friend. And so in the end, they're able to kind of kill off the colonizer in spectacular fashion. And shout out to that colonizer and his wife. Like, the actor who played the colonizer, very well done. I mean, he was just evil personified, right? He was just evil. I had nothing. His wife was evil. Everything was evil. There was just nothing. They just did a good job. And so finally they're together. And these fight sequences when they're together is amazing because, again, you have like fire and water. And so you have to combine different methods. So on one hand, you know, you'll see that, I like how they kind of switched, right? Because now Bheem is in a position where he is able to use a gun or he is able to ride a motorcycle. And Raju out of nowhere was shooting arrows and bows. And he wasn't in his suit anymore. Like, I love the switch in terms of clothing, in terms of vibes, right? Like, Raju went from being like, whatever the case, he was fine either way, but watching his image change, right? His hair is down, it's not cut. Like, he's totally turned the switch, and I love that in that final scene. So, you know, it's important to note when you the absurdity of like colonialism. Like, when you look back on it, you're like, that is crazy. There's a phrase in the movie that's shown pretty prominently once they're able to kill the colonizer, which is that the sun never sets on the British Empire, and that's a very evil, like, ominous phrase, because the idea is that they have so many colonies that the sun will never set on these colonies, right? Like, they're just, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? There's a British colony somewhere, essentially. So the absurdity of this statement is matched by the absurdity of these characters, because the fact that that was even a thing, you know, the idea that they would kind of maintain these colonies, and then when you match that to how they're able to kind of, you know, push back against these guys. Again, I do like how they match energies in this film. And so the movie ends, and it's like a fairy tale ending, right? It's a fairy tale ending in that, you know, now they can kind of move forward together, and they've kind of realized that both of them possess skills that the other one needs. And so they don't really have to compromise themselves anymore. And it was a really, really sweet movie. And the end credits, again, the end credits are fascinating because there's a lot to know, right? It makes a lot of references to the Indian flag, for example, that's undergone many changes, different revolutionaries, both controversial and heroic, that would be lost on, you know, general audiences, but it's still a blast, you know, like, you get to the end credits and you're like, you're still hyped, right? You're still like, oh my God, I need more. So what do I have to say about this film? Again, I don't think it matters. There are no cultural barriers when it comes, if something is good, you know. Are there things that we missed? Are there things that go above our heads? Probably, but you can still very much enjoy it. And also, what is wrong with entertainment? You know, ultimately this movie is about friendship, and it's about love, and it's about, you know, it is true, like, this shit makes people more powerful. And, you know, it is true, right? Like, you're more likely to do something extraordinary for someone you love than for yourself. And so I like how it used its environment to enhance its story, right? And it's a testament to great filmmaking and great storytelling, which is something we don't have anymore. Shout out to that. You know, shout out to everybody in this movie. So I enjoyed myself. I don't see how you cannot enjoy yourself watching this. I don't know. Like, for me, it was a blast. You guys let me know what you think, and until next time.